Well, greetings, vinyl community, and welcome to another VC Friday. So a few weeks ago, I took a walk to my local record store, Vinyl Solution, here in San Mateo, and it's a pretty substantial walk. It's about 2.5, 3 miles away, but I needed the exercise, so I did it on foot. And I was so disappointed when I found that the store was closed and was going to be closed through October 5th. Well, it turned out that Tommy, the owner, had taken a vacation, and he went to London, he went to Amsterdam, so he had a grand old time. And in honor of Tommy's trip to Europe, we're going to do a Round the World edition of VC Friday. I've got music from Indonesia, I've got music from the Indian subcontinent, I've got music from Scandinavia that has a heavy admixture of South African, and I'm going to bring it all back home with the most American music that ever America'd. So starting out with what I found when I visited Vinyl Solution on Friday, they'd dropped 3 records from the None Such Explorer series in the bargain bin. So I snapped those up, starting with the Jasmine Isle, gamelan music from Java. These 3 albums are all classics from the None Such Explorer series, all recorded by David Lewiston, who's got his name right there. And music of the Javanese gamelan is different in nature from the Balinese gamelan. It's softer and mellower than the more brash and exciting music that you would hear on, say, this record, Music from the Morning of the World, also recorded by David Lewiston, but not one of the ones that I picked up this week. This is a more mellow approach to the percussion orchestra, and you can see the various instruments used in the gamelan, mostly of the metallophone or like a metallic xylophone type, or gongs. And they use a pentatonic scale. This is all done in the slendro scale, which is one of the 2 main traditional scales of Indonesian gamelan music. Slendro is a pentatonic scale where the notes are spaced roughly evenly. So if you say that the bass note is a C in Western terms, the second note of the scale would be a slightly sharp D. The third note would be in between E and F. The fourth note would be roughly a G. And the fifth note would be in between A and B flat. And then it would come back to C an octave higher. But it's not all that exact. It's not tuned in precise intervals like Western music, and the instruments aren't tuned exactly to one another. The specific tuning of each bit of cast metal is considered part of the soul of that instrument, so it's not worried if it doesn't ring in precise unison with the other instruments of the orchestra. That beating between the different instruments playing the same note is just part of the charm and part of the overall spirit and sound of the gamelan orchestra. So one thing that I find particularly interesting about the liner notes here describing the background and the function of the different pieces is that the piece Kebo Giro, meaning scared water buffalo, is used as an overture at weddings and other ceremonies as well as at concerts. And I just kind of have an interesting mental picture when somebody participating in a wedding is considered a scared water buffalo. So, music from Java. over to the Indian subcontinent, music of the Himalayas, or the Himalayas if you prefer, festivals of the Himalayas. As the title suggests, this is actually recorded at festivals, harvest festivals, particularly in the Kulu Valley. They have it's like a big county fair with vendors and an amphitheater where people can watch the dancers perform. And although this is performed for an audience, it's not totally out in the open fields or whatever. These are still basically field recordings, so the sound balance with the voices and the instruments isn't going to be perfect. It's all just done on the fly by David Lewiston with a portable tape recorder. Still sounds cool. And you can see the instruments, at least some of them, used back here. There's the big trumpet-like instrument, the Haransinga. And there's the shawm or oboe called the shanai, which is a double reed instrument like an oboe, and the various types of drums, not all of which are represented here, but you'll hear that as well as a lot of singing on this album. It's got some translations of the traditional songs. One of these, it sounds like Mrs. Robinson. It's like from The Graduate. I would like to take red rice for my lover, Mrs. Kekati. Don't seduce my lover, Mrs. Kekati. If you seduce him, I will take poison, Mrs. Kekati. My lover and I would like to bathe at sacred places, Mrs. Kekati. Let's go now. It's not a good atmosphere here, Mrs. Kekati. Lover. What shall we eat when we get home, Mrs. Kekati? Girl, we will have red rice, Mrs. Kekati. Plastics. Actually a little worried about picking up that LP because there's a really nasty looking jagged scratch on side one, but it turned out to be completely superficial and not audible at all. So happy ending there. Now very close to the Himalayas is Kashmir. So we have Traditional Songs and Dances of Kashmir Volume 2 with a nice promo sticker on there, which sort of spoils the nice artwork, but at least it matches the color scheme. This music is more like what we usually hear when we think of Indian music. One of the instruments in particular is called here the nut, or nut, N-U-H-T, and it's essentially the same as the Indian ghatam. It's a clay pot or jug that's used as a percussion instrument. There's also the saranj, which is familiar as the sarangi in Indian music. It's a fiddle that's played in a vertical position like a cello. And this again is a combination of music for dance and for and folk songs. There's also music that's called folk opera. It's a tradition called Band Jeshna, as well as music called Sufiana Kalam, which is the so-called classical form, literally meaning music of mystic content. And there are some solo pieces here, as there are indeed on the gamelan music album, where you heard some pieces that are just the single instruments being played solo, interspersed with the main orchestra pieces. And a particular charming one is the rabab solo. The rabab is a kind of lute, familiar from the Arabic world as well. Just before the music starts, you can hear a rooster crowing in the background, so you know this is an open-air field recording. And next, music from Denmark, a great jazz album from 1984 by Pierre Durga and the New Jungle Orchestra, Brikama, named for a town in Gambia. And this is a big band recording. He's got an ensemble with himself on guitar, of course, 7 horns, including the great tenor sax player John Chikai, who plays tenor and bass clarinet here. Durga's wife, Irene Becker, is on keyboards. There's Bent Clausen on vibes. Secret Weapon Johnny Diani on bass. He's actually credited with talking bass, body percussion, vocal, and step dance, as well as Hugo Rasmussen, also on bass. Thomas Diani on congas and percussion, and Marilyn Mazur on drums and percussion. This is a really wonderful album. It draws on so many traditions, very prominently from African music, also from sounds like Mingus. Second track on here is a version of St. Louis blues that sounds very different from the traditional realization of that song. Dauda's Dream, Dauda being an African name adapted by Pierre Durga, is a really compositional piece that does remind me of Mingus. Rainbow Over the Bamboo Forest, the last track on side 1. For most of its length, it reminds me a little of Soft Machine. It's got a very floating, minimalist quality to it, very meditative, and then somehow before the end, it just veers into a wonderful, upbeat, percussion-heavy, and African chant. It's a call and response thing with the chorus addressing Johnny Diani, who responds with they're asking him what he sees, and he sees, as the title expresses, a rainbow over the bamboo forest. And it's just so joyful and so fun. This album, it's got elements of Duke Ellington, it's got elements of free jazz. There's a track that's specifically dedicated, titled To Mr. Dolphy. And finally, Potiersdag, or Potiersdag, I think I'm pronouncing that wrong. I don't know Danish. I very much don't know Danish. But written by John Chikai, and it's a more, it's a very cerebral piece, kind of a classical, again, kind of a Mingus-like composition. Great way to end the album. This is just a really splendid thing. And it's got some nice birds on the front. It is on the Steeplechase label from Denmark. Finally, as promised, some really American music, courtesy of none other than that crusty old New Englander Charles Ives and his Holidays Symphony, or specifically New England Holidays Symphony, although most of the holidays in question are celebrated nationally. Ives wrote 4 numbered symphonies, but this is not one of them. This is a piece in 4 movements where each movement was composed separately. The movements are scored for different instrumental combinations, and Ives intended them to be played either separately or in this sequence as a 4-movement symphony. The 4 holidays are selected to represent winter, spring, summer, and fall, and they do hold together partly through Ives' regular technique that we hear throughout his music of incorporating quotations from patriotic songs, from folk songs, fiddle tunes, all sorts of things that are easily recognizable, or were probably more recognizable in his day, but we still know a lot of these tunes. The first movement is George Washington's birthday, which for the non-US listeners is celebrated in February. This is a wintry piece. There's a lot of slow and meditative and solemn music throughout this. But this is wintry, and it does begin for most of the length of the movement with mostly strings. It's very lightly scored for just strings, 1 horn, 1 flute, but eventually it develops into a barn dance section, and the tempo picks up, and we have fiddle tunes, you hear the sailor's hornpipe, you hear a Jew's harp twanging away to give it that real rustic feeling. So it does become a celebration eventually, and it all ends with a quotation of "Good night, ladies." The second movement is Decoration Day, representing the spring, and Decoration Day, of course, is the old name for what we now call Memorial Day, named from the tradition of placing flowers on the graves of those fallen in war. And in keeping with what Memorial Day is all about, this is again mostly solemn, mostly meditative, slower music with a lot of strings. We hear distant bells until towards the end of the movement, once again, it just veers into this incredible upbeat celebration. It's a jubilant march. It's the most joyous parade you can imagine. And so we not only honor those fallen in war, we also celebrate what they died to protect. The third movement is the most generally upbeat. It's the 4th of July. And the third movement in a symphony in the kind of traditional symphonic layout is going to be the scherzo. So this would represent the scherzo. It's where the quotations from familiar songs just goes completely bananas. There must be 100 different tunes in here, with probably Pride of Place going to Columbia, Gem of the Ocean, which is just all over the 4th of July. It's a picture of fireworks, and it's meant to depict a child's wonder at watching 4th of July fireworks. Then the whole thing ends with Thanksgiving and or Forefathers' Day. Now, I'm not even familiar with Forefathers' Day. That's a specifically Massachusetts holiday celebrated in Plymouth, where the initial landing of the Pilgrims took place. So that is a celebration of the pilgrims. So it's a combination, but it's and that's celebrated just before Christmas. I think it's on the 22nd of December. This is the only part of the symphony that has voices, and they don't come in until the end. So there's a choral celebration of Thanksgiving, and it's taken from a hymn, God Beneath Thy Guiding Hand. So the Holidays Symphony by Ives, the Dallas Symphony Orchestra conducted by Donald Johannos, on the Turnabout label. So that's VC Friday for this week. Apologies for the construction noise outside if that was distracting. That's a block away, but it's super loud. So thank you very much for watching. Be well. I will talk with you again soon. Bye-bye for now.